Most people still think that $1 million per Bitcoin is impossible, but some of the biggest names in finance do not. Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, one of the biggest asset managers in the world, does not think it is crazy. Cathie, the CEO of ARK Invest, with over 15 billion in assets under management, also does not think it is crazy. Saylor, one of the biggest corporate Bitcoin holders in the world, does not think it is crazy either. And increasingly, governments do not think it is crazy either. Because when you start to look at the actual numbers, $1 million per Bitcoin may not be that crazy at all. There will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin, and millions of those are probably lost forever already. So when people talk about $1 million per Bitcoin, what they're really talking about is whether Bitcoin can ever reach a 21 trillion market cap. That sounds huge, but gold is already worth 20 trillion. So if Bitcoin simply reaches the market cap of gold, it's already close to $1 million per coin. Not because Bitcoin takes over the world, but simply because it reaches parity with one existing store of value. We can see here visually, Bitcoin is only a small fraction of gold's total market value. Gold is already worth more than $33 trillion. Meanwhile, Bitcoin sits at a very modest $1.5 trillion market cap. We can see from this graph here that Bitcoin's market capitalization in comparison to gold has increased over the last decade or so. Back in 2014, Bitcoin's market capitalization in comparison to gold was at only 0.13%. If we fast forward to today, we can see that Bitcoin is now at 4.23%, which tells us that over time, Bitcoin is catching up to gold. So if Bitcoin even begins to close that gap, the upside is still enormous, which is interesting because Bitcoin is arguably a more efficient store of value than gold in a digital world. You can move millions of dollars worth of Bitcoin across the world in minutes, if not seconds. You can't do that with gold. You do not need vaults, you do not need armed guards, and you do not need to ship it across borders. You can also divide it far more easily. So if Bitcoin eventually captures the same narrative as gold, $1 million per Bitcoin is not that hard to imagine. And if we zoom out even further, global real estate is worth more than $300 trillion. Global bonds are now worth more than $130 trillion. And broad money supply is worth hundreds of trillions. This helps put Bitcoin into perspective. Global stocks, bonds, and real estate are worth hundreds of trillions of dollars. And whilst this infographic is slightly out of date, it still helps us to understand the scale. Gold today is actually worth more than $33 trillion, and crypto is still only a tiny fraction of total global wealth. So even at $1 million per Bitcoin, it would still only represent a relatively small slice of the total global assets pie. Bitcoin does not need to absorb all global wealth. It only needs to capture a relatively small percentage of it. And then on top of that, there is money printing. It's actually wild to me that people don't realize that every single year, the global money supply keeps expanding. More dollars, more euros, more sterling, more debt, more currency creation. But Bitcoin does not change. The supply is fixed. As we can see from this tweet, global money supply keeps expanding year after year. This is one of the reasons so many people see Bitcoin as a hedge against inflation. Because while fiat currencies can keep expanding forever, Bitcoin cannot. And when something is scarce and demand keeps rising, the price usually follows. Other than just the math, institutions are becoming more bullish too. Bitcoin is no longer just a retail asset. Now you have ETFs, you have BlackRock, you have Fidelity, you have public companies, sovereign wealth funds, and governments all starting to pay attention too. BlackRock alone holds hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin through IBIT. And Larry Fink has said that Bitcoin could go between $500,000 and $700,000 if institutions allocate just 2 to 5% of their portfolios to it. Here's a video of Larry Fink speaking on the potential price of Bitcoin.
As an instrument, I was with a sovereign wealth fund during this week, and that was the conversation. Should we have a 2% allocation? Should we have a 5% allocation? If everybody adopted that conversation, but it would be 500,000, 600,000, 700,000 per Bitcoin.
It's pretty wild to think that Larry Fink, who used to be one of Bitcoin's biggest critics, now suggesting that Bitcoin could go as high as $700,000 per Bitcoin. Then you have Cathie, who believes Bitcoin could go as high as $1.5 million per coin by 2030.
What would your new target be? Yes, so we have always had a 2030 target, the base case in the 700 to 750,000 range, the bull case in the $1.5 million range. David Puel, our analyst and our on-chain analyst, put that piece out recently, and you can see the building blocks, how much share we expect Bitcoin to either take from gold or grow that store of value market. Institutions moving in, and they've barely moved in. We have 1 million more coins, roughly.
And what's really interesting here is that Cathie Wood is suggesting that institutions are barely even started moving in yet. Then you have the ex-co-founder and CEO of Twitter, Jack Dorsey, suggesting that Bitcoin could reach at least $1 million by 2030. Not because of hype, but because Bitcoin becomes more useful the more people who adopt it. And then there's Michael Saylor, who talks about a 2045 Bitcoin price prediction.
And I do believe with the digital assets framework that this administration could put forward, there's no reason why we won't see $500 trillion of assets tokenized over the next 21 years and 280 trillion in capital flow into the digital capital network that is Bitcoin.
And where does that lead Bitcoin's eventual price?
My 21-year forecast is for Bitcoin to appreciate about 29% a year, ARR, to $13 million a coin by the year 2045.
$13 million per coin by 2045. Now that is a wild prediction, but when you start to look at the fundamentals of Bitcoin, is it impossible? Not necessarily. And it's not just billionaires that are saying this. Prediction markets are becoming more bullish too. Kalshi traders now believe that Bitcoin will hit 96,000 this year, and that Bitcoin hitting $1 million within the next decade is far more realistic than people initially thought. Perhaps even more bullish for Bitcoin is not the billionaires are suggesting that it will go to millions, but the regulatory tide is turning. For years, Bitcoin was fighting regulators. Now regulators are starting to accept it. The SEC approved spot Bitcoin ETFs. The White House is now more pro-crypto, and even the idea of a US strategic Bitcoin reserve is no longer impossible. This matters because institutions and big capital hate uncertainty. The clearer the rules become, the easier it is for bigger pools of capital to enter Bitcoin. And then not so long ago, Trump exclaimed to the world something that would have sounded impossible a few years ago.
The federal government is already among the largest holders of Bitcoin, as you know. Really one of the largest holders in the world, with as many as 200,000 Bitcoin obtained via civil law and various other forms of law, and including enforcement actions. These existing holdings will form the foundation of the new reserve. Unfortunately, in recent years, the U.S. government has foolishly sold tens of thousands of additional Bitcoin that were worth billions and billions of dollars had they not sold them, but they did sell them, mostly during the Biden administration. Not a good thing to have done. From this day on, America will follow the rule that every Bitcoin knows very well: never sell your Bitcoin. That's a little phrase that they have out of.
Trump tells the audience that from now on, America will follow the rule that every Bitcoiner knows: never sell your Bitcoin. And there is another thing becoming increasingly more important: the Clarity Act. Because one of the biggest problems that crypto has had for years is that nobody knew which regulator was in charge. The Clarity Act would give a clearer framework for digital assets. It would give the CTFC authority over digital commodities like Bitcoin and leave security-related assets under the SEC. That matters because institutions want clear rules. They want certainty, and they know the rules are not going to change suddenly overnight. But the most bullish thing of all always remains the same. There are only 21 million Bitcoin. There's simply not enough to go around. There is a natural issue of scarcity. Millions are lost forever. Millions more have not moved in years. ETFs are buying, companies are buying, governments may start buying or are buying in some cases, and most people still own none. BlackRock's IBIT alone already holds hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin. Michael Saylor and Strategy keep buying more. Long-term holders are not selling. So the real question is not, can Bitcoin get to $1 million? The real question is, what happens if billions of people suddenly decide they want exposure? What happens if there simply isn't enough Bitcoin available? So when people laugh at the idea of $1 million per Bitcoin, they also laughed at the idea of $1 per Bitcoin, $10, $100, $1,000, $10,000, $100,000 also. They are missing the bigger picture. This is no longer just a retail trade. Bitcoin is becoming an institutional asset, a geopolitical asset. Recently, it was reported that Iran was demanding $1 in Bitcoin per oil barrel it allowed through the Strait of Hormuz, and potentially a reserve asset. $1 million per Bitcoin does not need everyone on the earth to buy it. Probably doesn't even need 90% of everybody on the earth to buy it. It just needs more capital, more institutions, more governments, and more belief. And right now, all of those things appear to be moving in Bitcoin's favor. Bitcoin at $1 million sounds insane, but Bitcoin at the size of gold's market capitalization suddenly sounds a lot more realistic. It's important to note that I am not a financial advisor and you should always do your own research. However, if you do want more founder level breakdowns on price predictions such as for Bitcoin, Ethereum and other altcoins, as well as crypto and where the broader markets could be heading next, please make sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel as it helps a lot.